Hello, I'm Andy, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to build a Bluetooth speaker using some reclaimed lumber, speakers from a car I no longer own, an amplifier board, and power supply that I purchased from Amazon.com. The front and back of the cabinet are made using 3/4 inch MDF that used to be part of a file cabinet I picked up on the side of the road for free, while the top, bottom, and sides are made using 1/2 inch plywood that's leftover scrap from a project I built for my niece. Being the speakers came out of a car that I purchased used, I didn't have the original cutout template. After a few tries, I ended up with a paper template that was close enough. I then transferred that to the wood using spray paint, brought that over to the bandsaw, and cut the purple part out of the boards. When you cut an interior shape out with a bandsaw, you have to make an entrance wound. I made the entrance wounds for this board on opposite sides. That way the amount of material lost isn't compounded on the same side of the board. I then put a little bit of wood glue into that cut, clamped it together, and by tomorrow you'll never know it was ever there. I'm now using my drum sander to tweak the final shape of the speaker holes, making an even spacing all the way around the speakers. As I edit my videos, I realize how much I really need some sort of a dust collection system. I have most of the parts it would take to build one. It just isn't that high on my priority list because it doesn't really excite me to want to build. I'm now using a fairly large roundover bit to put a nice curve to the inside edge of the speaker holes. I'm mounting the speakers to the back side of the baffle because the tweeters protrude a little bit beyond the speaker, and if I mounted them on the front and the speaker fell over forward, I'm afraid they will break off. Automotive speakers are free air type speakers. They don't require a box to limit the movement of the woofer cone. Generally, the back of the automotive speaker is a vented door panel, trunk, some sort of large area. Because of this, I decided the back of my box should be fairly open. I sketched out a few different designs on the back, ended up using the largest design that I sketched out, used the drill press to make the corners symmetrical, and then cut out in between those using the jigsaw. Once again, I'm back at the spindle sander, making all the edges square and straight. I bought this spindle sander kind of on a whim. I didn't have even a project in mind for using it, and now I use it, I think, on almost every project. I now have a smaller roundover bit in my router table, and I'm putting a roundover on both the inside and outside edges of the rear opening. Originally, I looked at a few different handle designs. I didn't really like any of them, and this gave me the ability to have a handle all the way around the cabinet, and it didn't cost me anything. I used brad nails and wood glue to hold this all together. The nails are really there just to hold it till the glue dries. First I installed the sides, and then I installed the top and the bottom. I thought this might be the most durable way when it comes to setting it on the ground and having the corners last the longest. I like using toilet paper to clean off my glue squeeze out. I'll use a couple squares, clean a little bit, use a new couple squares, clean a little bit. I feel that it's more economical than paper towels, so I don't use it so long that I end up putting glue back on my project. I then gave the box a complete sanding and rounded all the corners over with the same roundover bit I used on the inside of the back. At this point, I'm still thinking I'm just going to give this thing a coat of paint and put the electronics in it. And that's when I started with the primer. I had some red primer here, and I used up what I had left. I had some gray I used up too on this project. This project used a lot of primer. I ended up sanding almost all of the red primer off, leaving just what was left in the pores of the oak plywood and the seams and brad nail holes. At about this point in the project is where I decided, instead of making something just banged together out of reclaimed lumber like I normally would for myself, I should make something I'm really proud of. And I started layering on the primer to fill all the pores of the wood. I also used plastic wood to fill the brad nail holes and any seams that were left. While sanding is usually when I'm thinking about the next project, and this project gave me plenty of time for thinking. You'll see 4 spots there along the speaker holes. Those are where the screws came through when I test fit the electronics. I'm really glad I test fit the speakers, because right now it's just a minor inconvenience to repair. After the piece was finished, it'd be a real pain in my ass. I now knew to grind the tips of the screws off before final assembly. I wet sanded with 220 and then 400 grit sandpaper between the final coat of primer and the paint, so the paint had as smooth a surface as possible to start with. It's been about 2 weeks since I sprayed my first squirt of primer, and I'm finally ready for some paint. I decided that I'm going to wrap the outside of it with walnut veneer, so I only really had the front and back to do, but being the whole inside of it's visible, the inside I had to finish nicely also. Using my ripping fence and the blade set to about 1/16 of an inch deep, I put a score line all the way around the front and the back of the box to separate between the orange painted area and the area that's going to be walnut veneer. I used an X-Acto knife to clean up the rounded corners that were missed by the table saw. The walnut veneer that I'm going to use I purchased from Axeman Surplus a couple years ago. The first project I used it on, I realized how thin this veneer really was, that you could actually see through it. Therefore, anything that you do want to use it on, you have to paint brown underneath first. It's not a terrible veneer otherwise. The grain looks nice, it cuts nice, and the pressure sensitive backing seems to stick quite well. Off camera, I painted the area underneath the veneer brown with some spray paint I had left over from an old project. Each piece of veneer wrapped about halfway around the box with about 1 inch extra. I put both pieces on and then cut through them both at the same time with the X-Acto knife, peeling off the extra, leaving a perfect seam line. Even if my cut wasn't straight, it was uneven equally on each side, and I was pretty happy with the results. I then used the X-Acto knife and cut the veneer to width, using that groove I had made earlier. The only corner of the veneer that didn't go around nicely is the one that's showing right now. You can see a couple little wrinkles in it. Using acrylic paint, I painted that groove between the walnut and the orange black. It took 2 coats, and in the end I had switched from the small paintbrush to a small foam brush. It was more time consuming than I wanted it to be, but in the end I was really happy with the results of it. At this point I had a box that looked way nicer than I ever planned it to be, and I realized I never drilled a hole for the power cord. Luckily the paint was not damaged while I did drill this hole. The last thing to do was add a couple coats of wipe-on poly to the walnut, and woodworking wise this project was done. One of the reasons I did not have a hole drilled for the power cord was this short power cord was kind of an afterthought. Originally I was just going to plug the power supply right into the amplifier board, but I decided for durability reasons if the cord got kicked or pulled in any way, this would make for a much more durable speaker, and it'd make it worth its $3 price just in that. It also makes it a little bit more user friendly. This little $14 amplifier board came with these little plastic standoffs, so I just glued the standoffs right to the inside of the box, and I glued the power cord into the box up the one side and then looped it back down just to make it so it was the least visible overall. Now that I have the power cable hot glued down out of the way, I screw the speakers into the front baffle. This project started out as a real just utilitarian, I'm going to bang a speaker together, and by the end, 3.5, 4 weeks later, I am really happy with the results I ended up with. I went from just a very utilitarian speaker to a real mid-century modern minimalistic speaker. More thought went into the design of this after I made the first cut than ever went into it before. After I have the speakers installed, I make a pair of wires that attach the speakers to the amplifier. This amplifier is very easy to use. All it has is a power input and a pair of speaker outputs. The power input works anything from 10 or 12 volts all the way up to 24 volts. I have a 19 volt power supply for it, but I could see using this in a boat or a car in place of a radio, using just the Bluetooth connected to your smartphone. And with the speakers connected, the project is done. Thank you for watching me build this Bluetooth speaker. I'd encourage anyone to buy one of these cheap little amplifier boards from Amazon and play around. Make a pair of speakers. Power a pair of speakers you already have. Go to Goodwill and buy a pair of speakers and mount this inside of one of those speakers. The board works really well. A little bit of static or buzz when you first turn it on, but once it connects that seems to disappear, and I'm very happy with the results overall. Thank you for watching, and if you like this video, please subscribe to my channel for more. Until next time, happy making.